Welcome back. We're talking with Barbara Beckwith, writer and writing teacher. After having been an English teacher for 11 years, Barbara received her master's degree in journalism at Boston University in 1983. She then went to work for the Middlesex News and Brookline Chronicle. She decided then to turn her hand at freelancing. Many of the things that Barbara has done have been in Boston Globe, Christian Science Monitor, for example, Ms. Magazine, and many, many others. She's presently co-authoring a book on the SAT for Fair Test, and she's also co-chair of the National Writers Union Boston Local. Barbara, that's very impressive. I'm so glad you joined us.
Thank you.
The first thing I've got to find out is how a person actually gets started in writing, because I know so many people have thought, wouldn't it be great to have their words in print, but never quite managed to do it. How did you start?
Well, I think I've been writing since I was about 6, when my parents gave me an old black typewriter because I think I was telling them to write down too many of my stories.
Oh ho!
So I just, a lot of people write when they're young, and then I think they get scared in high school. But I kept on writing. And then when I became a teacher, I found myself writing along with my students. And I think I did every assignment, every poetry, short story, essay assignment I gave my students. And so I was quite practiced as a teacher and realized I loved it. And I started writing public relations pieces for the school in the local newspaper, and then features for my local Cambridge Chronicle and personal essays. And I wrote a lot for free for Sojourner, a women's journal in Cambridge.
Oh, yeah.
And then I started to write for the Boston Globe, focusing on education. And finally decided I would go for the higher rates that a magazine gives nationally. And then I decided to try my hand at a book. So that's what I'm doing now.
Oh, that's very impressive. I hear a lot of people say that in order to become published, you have to be this great literary talent. Do you believe that to be true?
Maybe in fiction, but I'm a nonfiction writer,
Okay.
and I think you can work at it, and if you're sensitive to your audience and you show your work to somebody else to check out how you're coming off, that you can grow, and I've seen people grow from writing that couldn't be published to writing that could be. And also, newspapers need you, and magazines need you.
Really?
Like the Boston Globe, for instance, averages about 11 freelanced articles in the travel section alone every week.
That's amazing.
And you can tell them by it's written special to the Globe, which means a freelancer has done that article. And if you just look in that one newspaper, you'll see how often freelancers get in.
So that would be a real clue to how much in any section that they use them, and you could use that as a guide. Oh, that's marvelous. How does a beginning writer actually direct his or her efforts? I mean, to know what magazines or newspapers are looking for.
Well, I think you have to read a lot, which can be expensive. So you need to find a place to browse.
Yeah.
So you read to see what the style is and what the subject matter is in a particular magazine that you might be interested in. And you can also look in Writer's Market, which will tell you what a publication is looking for.
That's a wonderful book.
Right. This would be for magazines. You can also send to a magazine and often a newspaper for their writer's guidelines, and they will tell you how to submit the topics they're interested in. And sometimes they have a calendar of events, especially
Really?
calendar of specials, especially travel sections will say on a certain month we want stories about cruises, or we want stories about the Caribbean or Europe.
Well, that'd be very handy to plan the types of things that you send to them. But I wonder also, are magazine and newspaper writing the same, or are they different, and if so, how are they different?
Yes, people, I think editors at magazines complain, you're writing like a newspaper. So there is a difference that the writer has to figure out if they're moving to magazines from newspapers. Basically, it's a longer article. So therefore, your reader can get lost. So you have to have a very clear theme, and you have to keep reminding your reader what that theme is, or they'll forget what you were writing about. And you need more color. Color in this sense means description, quotes, conversation. And I think also you need a good ending, which you don't necessarily need in a newspaper article, because newspaper articles very often get cut from the bottom.
Right.
So you can let it trail off, but in a magazine, you need a good one. A magazine comes out maybe 9 months after you've given them an article idea and they've said go ahead with it. So you have to think ahead. There's a long lead time.
Wow.
So for instance, very often for many magazines the lead time will be over 9 months. So you have to think in the late spring about a winter article. And this is a real, you also need to choose article ideas that aren't so time limited that they won't be interesting in 9 months. They have to be a long-term interesting idea.
So if they're slightly more general than, say, related to dates like Christmas or Hanukkah or any that sort of thing, that's better.
Yes.
In general.
Yes.
Okay. How about the turnover time for newspapers? I take it it's not going to be 9 months. How rapid is it? Is it generally?
Oh, quite rapid. You can, if you send in a query idea, or you send in an article themselves, it could be in the newspaper in 2 weeks. So that is much easier to deal with. You can find a hot idea and get an article out on it before the idea gets cold.
Oh, that feels good. You can see your name in print immediately. I noticed that, for example, in the writer's market, they say when you send in your query or article idea that you're supposed to send clips along. Well, if you're a beginning writer, how are you going to send clips along if you don't have any published articles to send?
Right.
What do you do?
A clip is basically a Xerox of something that you have published. So you have to get published anywhere you can. And I know some markets that, some publications that you can write for free. People might not know it, but they actually don't pay you anything. But that's all right. I would say write for anyone and everyone in order to get Xerox copies of something that's been published. And every time you get one of them, you impress an editor more. So write for free if you have to, is what I'd say.
And local markets?
And local markets, start with local. Although I also think it's fun to try the highest, well, the national markets as well as the local markets. You know, send something to Savvy while you're sending something to the Brookline Chronicle. And try them both.
Why not?
I've had students who have leapt to national magazines for their first article.
Really?
And very often it's because they're good at writing humor, and humor is a very valuable commodity. Humorous essays.
Hint, hint, hint. That's great. How do you decide what you're going to write about and for whom you're going to write it?
Well, it is a balance. I think if you only think, what would this magazine or newspaper want, you kind of lose your core of why you're doing freelancing. So that you have to go with what interests you, I think. That's how I got started. I took my neighborhood and then I went on to things that interested me and wrote about them and tried to, so that I was involved in the idea. And then I tried to find a slant that would make it marketable to a particular magazine. So kind of like go with what you like, but be very aware of what the market wants, but don't give yourself up to the market completely.
So really read that particular magazine so you know the kinds of things they like and how they like them phrased. Which should you consider first? The subject area you like or the particular market in which you want to place it, the particular magazine? When
I teach freelancing, I teach a course at the Cambridge Adult, Breaking into Print. I tell people what the markets are, but I start with their ideas, just because it's hard to lose yourself in how can I please the market. So I think you just have to look around you, and what you are interested in is probably a marketable idea. The clever thing is to get it hung on a slant that is new. An old idea, for instance, the Globe, and every magazine has to do a fall article every single year. They have to do Christmas articles. The food section has to do Christmas food articles. They need something new. They're dying for something fresh. An old idea with a new angle is really your best bet. You don't necessarily need a completely new happening that you've found in the world.
It doesn't have to be unique, just a slight twist on the old. Okay. Now you teach writing and you teach journalism at the area colleges, Suffolk and Framingham State, and of course at the adult education centers. What is the biggest problem or obstacle that you've found that beginners face, beginning writers?
Well, in college, that's one thing. I think you have to, the biggest obstacle is that the students are writing for a grade,
well,
and you're trying to get them to write for people to read. But adults come because they want to write to be published. They want to write to share with an audience. So you have a good start there. And I think the biggest problem is becoming sensitive to that audience. And the way people become sensitive to the audience to see if their writing is coming off is to share it with other people. So we read the articles and we give each other positive feedback and also suggestions for change. And people grow enormously just by finding out from 10 people how they're coming off.
So you're really writing for the reader rather than for yourself.
Well, it's you write for yourself, but then you have to make sure that you're conveying what you want to.
Yeah. Okay. Freelancing really does sound glamorous, at least to the person who isn't doing it and wants to. What are the pluses and minuses of being a freelance writer?
Well, the pluses would be freedom and would be the variety and the creativity that you can bring. You can pursue anything that interests you and on your own time. But it is very difficult to make a living. And I know very few people in the National Writers Union who are full-time freelancers. Some book writers are, but most people, even if they're book writers, are also teachers or do part-time editing. It's very hard to make a living at freelancing. That's the disadvantage. But people who do it love it. That's why they continue.
How about the isolation?
Yes, that's very true. That's one of the biggest disadvantages, and that's why you need a group around you to share your... Usually, you're the only writer on the block. You're the only writer in the neighborhood. The point is to find some other people, the 2 blocks over, who are also writers.
I hadn't thought about that. You're probably right. Since writing is like almost any other business, and you've got to market yourself in order to make it, how does the freelance writer essentially create visibility for him or herself, kind of open opportunities up?
Well, I think you do network with as many other writers so that you hear when a new publication's coming up, or you hear an editor is looking for writers. And I would say that specializing in some area and becoming known as a writer in that area is something that is very good to do, although I resist it because I'm a general freelance writer because I'm interested in a lot of things. But there is an advantage to becoming a specialist so that you will be a health writer or a writer about women or science and technology writer. So that will give you more visibility.
So that if a magazine, Ms. or Atlantic Monthly, needs a particular type of writer, they might immediately think of you because they associate the two.
Right.
Well, that's a good idea. Since the freelancer is, as you mentioned before, isolated, how does he or she share information and strategies and also the frustration? Could you tell us a little more about ways a person can do that?
Well, people can go to conferences.
Yeah.
Is this the point where I should tell you about some conferences coming up?
That would be terrific. I'd love to hear some.
For instance, there is a conference at Emerson, Writing for Pay, I think it's called, coming up October 30th, an all-day conference with about 12 different presenters in all different areas. And there's also a screenwriters conference, Writing for the Screen conference, October 20th. Which the National Writers Union, which I'm co-chair of, is running. And in the spring there's going to be an all-day conference which we will hold, which will be very big and wonderful.
And that'll will that be in the area?
That will be in the area. Last time it was at the Kennedy School of Government.
We will have your address at the end so that people can indeed get in touch with you to find out when.
And I would say join organizations. I would say join the National Writers Union, and I'll tell you more about it. But there are other organizations as well. There's an Alliance for Independent Scholars in Cambridge for academic writers who aren't professors at a university. They're independent academic writers. Freelance Editorial Association, if you want to freelance your editorial skills to balance your freelance writing skills, you can join this organization and learn about available jobs.
Oh, that would be handy.
And the National Women's Book Association, the Boston chapter, is that would include editors and people in the publishing world, but that you could make good contacts there. And the New England Poetry Club, to meet other poets. And PEN, which is Poets, Essayists, and Novelists. It's an organization that holds very nice workshops on like being a writing couple, when both in a couple are writers, how you handle it, or being a ghostwriter. And then you could meet people at this new resource. If you apply and are accepted, it's called the Writer's Room, and it's just opening now. There's one in New York. It is a room where you can rent a space to write, simply to write. And it's in the Transportation building in Boston, and the program is under the Artist Foundation.
Oh,
I don't think that's right.
What a wonderful resource.
Yeah. We're going to have to go over that. I don't think that's right. So I would say join organizations, go to conferences, and develop a support group. The Writers Union has several, just to share your writing with that audience that you need to have your ear out to.
Well, since you do seminars on networking for freelancers, are there any additional tips that on networking that you could add to what you've already said, which are already good networking tips?
Well, I would say hang around the bookstores. No, actually go to readings.
Yeah.
Meet other writers, basically. And writers, at least the writers in the Writers Union, are very open to sharing their skills. And there are readings everywhere for both poetry at places like the Blacksmith House or prose at the Trident coffee shop in Boston, where people can read their prose stories to an audience. Get some feedback.
You keep talking about the Writers Union. We've really got to talk about that. Now, you're co-chair of the National Writers Union Boston Local. I want to know what it is and how you joined.
All right. The National Writers Union is not a club, it's a union. It's an organization of writers of all kinds, novelists, poets, journalists, every kind of writer. And we're basically coming together to make sure that we get paid well and get treated well by editors and publishers. But in the process, we do a lot of sharing of skills and networking. And that's why people come to us. They feel isolated. They can't get their money from a publisher.
Whoops.
They want to use our grievance procedure. Or they just want to get some networking contacts from the union.
How successful has the union been in taking care of contract problems?
Well, I think that we've saved thousands of dollars for people who used to write for New Age, Whole Lifetimes, publications that have changed or closed now. But in the process, they weren't paying their writers. Writers seem to be the first people who the publisher doesn't pay if they're in debt. And only the kind of publicity that we can put out and the pressure of the writers' community now saying you will be known as a bad person to write for, can get that money for an individual freelancer who's completely isolated and helpless, really. If they're not being paid, what can they do?
Absolutely not.
And now we have 470 writers, mostly in the Boston area, but also in Western Massachusetts, some in New Hampshire. A new group is starting to orient itself toward the Union on the Cape.
So when you say Boston Local, it really covers all of Massachusetts? Oh, okay. You've listed so many benefits. I mean, getting your money and having all these people with whom to network.
Oh, there's one more.
Oh, another benefit. Good.
Actual contracts. We have negotiated for a contract that would cover any freelance writer, whether the person be a National Writers Union member or not, for about 10 magazines and newspapers. And Columbia Journalism Review, The Nation, Ms. Magazine, Black Film Review, a whole series. And most recently, we've made an agreement with Plowshares, on which is a very well-known small press literary magazine,
right,
to regularize their rates and their standards, which would apply to anybody who writes for them. And this is what we're trying to do for every publication and book publisher in the nation, but that's a long-term strategy.
Oh, I mean, one could feel much more secure knowing that you have a little clout behind you, a little power. A person by him or herself is kind of left hanging. Would you tell us about some of the resources that you've brought that freelancers can really benefit from? Right.
Well, I would say that a writer's market is for a journalist. I'll show it to you again because it's really the Bible.
Yes.
It will tell you the rates, it will tell you the contact people, although you should call up to check that the address and the editor are still the same, because there is a lag time in making a book up, and it could be old, but it will give you a lot of information. And also there are 2 magazines for freelance writers. The Writer is in the Boston-based, and the Writer's Digest is another one. And they will give, particularly for beginning writers, they will give you some inspiring stories about how you can write and you can get published. And once a year, the Writer's Digest will list the best 100 magazines to write for by a variety of standards. And they will, I think both of them will tell you about upcoming conferences so that you can think way ahead and sign up for them and save the money for them. So they are useful, especially for beginners.
Oh, good.
And then my favorites.
Yes?
The Craft of Interviewing, I understand, is now out of print, but it should be in your library, and it's a delightful book by John Brady. And I think I enjoy this book.
Hopefully your library has it.
Yes.
Yes.
How to Write Like a Pro, and other books by Barry Tarshish. Barry Tarshish is one of the few writers on freelancing who dares to tell you how to structure an article. Most books seem to shy away from that sticky subject because it's difficult.
Absolutely.
And then there are many books, but there are some that are very specialized. The Travel Writers Markets. This is from California. And if you wanted to know more about it, you could call the National Writers Union, and I could tell you where to get hold of this particular book. So
there is apparently a series of books that will tell you about different types of writing?
Right.
Different genre?
There are a lot of books out.
Oh.
And then I think that as for resources, I do think that just the kind of groups, if I may, in the National Writers Union can help you. For instance, we have a database of members' opinions and critiques of their agents, which you can tap into. We have a contract advisory group, so that if you're about to sign a book or a magazine contract, you can call one of our advisors and get some advice. And we also have a journalist marketing support group, which I'm a member of, and which we don't share our manuscripts, but we share our queries and our ideas and get help on where to market our ideas. It meets once every 2 weeks on a drop-in basis, and it's been going on for 2 years. And there are similar ones for poets and fiction writers in the union.
Very, very briefly, because we unfortunately are running out of time, people always ask, do I need an agent if I'm a magazine writer or I'm a beginning book author? Do I need a writer? I mean, an agent, excuse me.
I must say that in the National Writers Union, there seems to be quite a lot of controversy about that. You'll get a discussion going if you, among some writers, and ask that question. I think that if you're a magazine writer, an agent probably won't bother with you. They do want to deal with people who are ready with their first book. And I think they'd prefer if you had already written one book, and then they'd be happy to work with you on your next ones.
Oh, this has been wonderful. I so appreciate you sharing all this wonderful information, the secrets of breaking into print and trying to live the life of a freelancer. Thank you, Barbara. It's been delightful. Well, I hope you join us again next time when we have more information to help get you on the inside track.